Yeah, that mic's on, all the table mics are on, we're live, we're good to go. If you're up here, you can use this handheld, there's people on here. If you're sitting at the table. you guys can sit.
So I will sit right by you. Mix it up a little bit, sit in a different spot.
Get some brownie points for showing up.
Yeah, I mean, I feel
I'll
like.
sit down, maybe fill up a car, gas card or something.
What budget? Dinner at your house. What budget? When the door she make me put all this stuff on my chemicals. So I'm doing it.
All right, the time is 5:04, and we're going to go ahead and convene our Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Board Committee meeting. So thank you for the packed house we have tonight. It's a lot of voices in here tonight, so just please feel free to raise your hand and just call out if you feel the urge.
Will do.
But we're gonna just jump right into it. Our committee chairperson, board member Stephanie Walker, is out today. But she will be tuning in virtually. However, we have board member McManus here. So first things first, announcements. So moving forward, this will be our last EDI board committee meeting before tomorrow's the day, election day. So it really was just a debrief as we prepare to pick back up in January. So just the few announcements that we would have had. First, I want to open up to community announcements. So if there's anyone here, if you guys have any announcements for the greater good of equity, diversity, and inclusion. And Ms. Shawn, can you do me a favor? Caress is absent. Could you just jot down some quick notes?
Yep,
Okay,
absolutely.
Perfect. So for community announcements, that's when I open it up to the floor. If you guys have any prospective industries, anything related to EDI that you just want to share out, any resources, any trainings, new knowledge gain, anything that we should be aware of, that's when I'll open up the floor. For any school level officials like Ms. Espinoza, I have just opened up the floor for any school level announcements. And then district announcements that would either come from the board or that would come from myself. As far as district announcements, like I said, this is a debrief. The only announcement that we have, which takes us right to our next bullet point, is our parent work group update. We have officially selected all of our members for our parent work group. So we had 281 families apply. We narrowed it down. We have a team of 43 people, and we have 33 schools represented. So that's actually a great spread. And I will send out emails to all those finalists for the work group tomorrow. And our first meeting will not be until January. Questions, comments?
Thank you. One thing I would like to bring up, and I brought up at the board meeting the other night, is I'd like the EDI to hopefully make some suggestions as to, and my term was out of the box. I mean, I know we're putting forth every conceivable effort with staff to try to help the students who are behind.
Yeah.
But I'd like to see discussion about something different, and maybe challenge the county commissioners to support taking a couple of the lower performing schools identified by, of course, test scores, and then maybe do something totally different, school within a school, if not separate, extremely small individual classes, and maybe even if we have to do it on the same campus a year long.
Okay.
And then you develop those intersessions, and then they can also do additional tutoring then but with a focus on math and literacy.
Okay.
I've been to the schools and I've watched the teachers, and they're busting it. They are busting it. And I just always thought that one of the single most influential teaching tools to me was the smaller the class size, the more that you can you can work with and hopefully make way. I've seen it done. It's a whole lot easier when you've got such a really small group to deal with, because you know them so well and you pick up on so much. But anyhow, I'm just hoping EDI, something like ADI to do is to think out of the box.
Okay.
If we do it from a rooftop, if it works, we need to try it.
And this is the platform where we will all come and we'll share those and kind of have some pushback. So one thing I do want to get to, but I'm going to get to that in the EDI report. Right now, we're looking at, for the 43 members, that first meeting is in January, and we want this work group to meet quarterly. Because it's a lot of individuals, but I also want it to have substance. So the goal of the parent work group, that's our army. Those are our parents who their task, being super intentional with the purpose of this work group, is to truly, they're reaching out to the PTA if there's one at their school. If there's not a PTA at that school, they're in the school just talking, really trying to understand, the inequities that exist as far as academic outcomes. So from that parent perspective, what is something that they see? And knowing that, with this parent work group, it's 43 parents with 33 schools, we cast a wide net. If we can, intrinsically motivate. So when I come to you all, I also want to talk about how do we motivate the parents? How do we equip the parents to go into the schools and ask those necessary questions to understand? So some of our strategic planning prior to that meeting can be around developing, a little checklist for parents.
Maybe even having parents in the classroom on certain days so they can see what's going on.
Yeah.
Ask questions. So they have something to take home with them.
Yeah.
That they've seen and observed. I don't know, I just feel like we need to get out of the box and try some other things as well.
What does the research say on that? I guess I'm asking because I I just remember a comment Dr. LaShawn Smith had made, and this was about a year ago, as we were talking about parent involvement and how to make that better for underperforming schools, for example. We were just brainstorming, essentially.
Well, that's the biggest thing, you know, it's like what defining parent engagement.
Right.
What does that look like?
Right.
Because we oftentimes have this one view of what parent engagement is. That individual parent who can come at 11 to 12, who can volunteer, who can actively, physically be in the building. And we've labeled that. And that doesn't take, the inequity in that, it doesn't take in consideration, you know, the parents and caregivers that work those alternative schedules.
Right, there's
who work
working,
third shift,
right.
You know, and we've had this assumption when the parent is absent physically from the school, they don't care about their child's education, and we know that's not true.
Right, exactly, and I think that was one of our comments was, and it was a good point, was that it does not correlate to growth and test scores and academic outcomes. Like I think there's this like assumption that it does, because a lot of times that's what we see.
Right.
And I don't know that, and she said that the research does not show that necessarily, and so it was a very cryptic comment, and it was made in passing, and I would be very interested to say, like, to understand more context about that. I do agree with you, like, we might not see engagement measured in the same way, and how can we help with that from a communication standpoint? But I would also be interested to see if the research shows that does help outcomes, because I don't want us to focus on something that's not going to be helpful.
All right.
You know?
I think kids' exposures to peripheral is a major part of their educational gains and substance. A lot of students, unfortunately, have not traveled. They've not been to a big city.
Yeah.
They've not been to a big museum. They've not been to the mountains, walked in a stream. They've never really experienced all those peripherals that, when you know, cumulatively, you know, give you first exciting and things that you want to do again and look forward to. And I feel like part of what we get out of the box to do is maybe we do so many trips a year where the kids are exposed to things they otherwise would never be exposed to. And a fun day. And I just think that will help us be more creative.
Yeah, I do like that comment about exposure. Exposure
I look
is
at
important.
myself, and when I think back and reflect, you know, I took for granted. I mean, we always took trips, particularly in the summertime. But I mean, you know, some kids have never been to the mountains when it was snowing. They've never been. I mean, it's just things that they can appreciate and relate. I call it the peripheral education.
Yeah, and that, you know, that
enrichment,
and it's deeply rooted, you know, in student
perfect
outcome,
word.
because that level, what exposure does, whether it's exposure through, you know, trips and experiences, or exposure through, you know, literacy and learning, it really increases that student's like arsenal to make meaningful connection.
Yes.
Especially when it comes to standardized testing, and sometimes those questions can be rather confusing because that person has no connection to the context of what's being asked for them in those math problems or in those the reading portions of our standardized testing. So no, that's a valid point.
Yeah, that is a really, I appreciate that. Like exposure, and that's half the battle, you know, is exposure. And what you just said about increasing the context, it reminded me of a comment that was made at the most recent conference I went to on inclusive education. And the comment was specifically, we have to think, instead of teaching students skills about, you know, facts, for example, we have to teach students strategies. You know, skills around strategy development, like developing strategies for problem solving, because everybody has different ways to approach a problem and break that down, to your point about class size.
And if you did it year round, then you've got those intersessions that you can do the dates yourself, and so you can take it. Those are opportunities to. You don't have to use the whole time, but that's the time where you can really just opportunities that kids have never seen or dreamed of, that just changes the whole persona and the way they look at things.
And I think those things that you bring up, being intentional about documenting those things, and those are some of the things we can list as charges for our parents. but as they go into the school, as they partner with, when they talk to, the teachers, when they talk in front of PTA, when they talk to the administration, the importance of having that level of exposure. Or, and just being honest, I was talking with a teacher at Forest Hills Global Elementary School about how do we leverage the skills and the talents of the parents that come in that building every single day to drop their students off. What type of, exposure could we get that doesn't necessarily mean a future? These parents have a lot of experiences and access to resources and knowledge that we can leverage. There was there's a interest in starting a parent. I don't know the details of it yet. We haven't fleshed it out. Starting a mentorship program for our male students, and they reached out to me to find prominent male figures in the community. That's what we typically do. But my biggest pushback was the biggest prominent male figure in these students' lives are the individuals who are dropping them off. So how do we build programming that highlights that? And we typically, when we choose people to come and speak to our students, we always choose the professional with that fancy title, with the perceived most impactful job to come and speak to our kids for inspirational. And I agree with that, and there's nothing wrong with that. But then there's also an opportunity for us to highlight and demonstrate that there's inspiration to be found in our community, whether it's through our blue collar workers, which is where we fall most, especially my parents. That's where we found ourselves sitting. So just being honest and being real, because we can't continue to bring these high level executives, the most important people, when we know we're not doing our best to equip our students to reach that. So how do we set that bar high with, wanting our kids to, to shoot for the moon and land among stars. But then how do we also...
We want to find value
and highlight the value of our community members. I don't want to sound, not to be, I'm trying to choose our words very carefully.
No, you want to find value in every role is very important. You don't want to be like, oh, you're only going to be successful if you go get a PhD and do this.
Exactly.
That's not true.
Yeah.
It's simply not true. But
actually, that's true. What you just said, more so now than ever.
Right. It is.
Degrees don't mean a whole lot like they used to, unless math.
Right.
You just don't want to set a hard technical degree.
Right.
Yeah.
I think it's disingenuous to be like, okay, you have to go get X degree to be successful, but it's also you don't want to set a ceiling for children either. You want to expose children to all sorts of different measures of success.
And that's one way we can work to intentionally leverage this work group.
Right.
So moving from the work group into just the EDI report, there are a little bit more things on here that I didn't list. If I mention things that I'm asking you just for best practices, if there's some things that I'm mentioning that I didn't list in my report, I need to go back and add that to the agenda, or?
You do what works best for you.
Okay, I didn't want to go against the protocol.
No, yeah.
Okay.
You're the big cheese.
All right, I want to make sure I follow board protocol. Okay, perfect. So quick EDI report. I had the opportunity to go to Forest Hills Global Elementary School and meet with their faculty on the 26th of October, if I'm not mistaken. And we talked briefly about implicit bias and microaggression. So I just want to show you all just the presentation that we were able to introduce. It wasn't a full-fledged training, but just introducing concepts just to build on. And the biggest thing I just want to share with you all that I just was super inspiring is just what this bias looks like in the classroom and outside the classroom. Mm-hmm. And the biggest thing, the biggest takeaway with the time that I had was to give real life examples. And these are some of the ones that stood out to me. So bias in the classroom, how you respond to students that are not engaged or avoiding tasks can highlight your bias. how you respond to students that engage in destruction and physical aggression, your voice, tone, and body language when giving feedback on their work, how long you wait for a student to respond to a question, and how much background knowledge you assume when introducing concepts. Outside the classroom is how you engage with a student's family about their schoolwork, how you engage with the student's community outside of school, and how you define perceived family engagement, how you talk about a student to other educators, and how you prioritize competing academic, social, and emotional vocational goals within your classroom. Focusing on those first three, I keep going back to the parent work group, and what role could they play in really helping us readdress, because, one thing I've learned in some of the feedback that I receive from teachers, we have a lot of teachers, coming from a pipeline of UNCW and various other institutions that it's not inner city Wilmington, but that's who these teachers are teaching. They're teaching students who come from inner city Wilmington, and how do we kind of mine that gap of that cultural competence?
Yeah.
Because what I realized, we have a lot of phenomenal teachers who mean well, who want to do great work, but they don't know how to make that connection with the student because there's a lack of understanding of where that student comes from.
Yeah.
Because I feel like there's some generalization that takes place when you have students being bused from one neighborhood. There's an assumption that all these students are in trauma, all these students need some type of additional support, when that's not the case.
Right.
So when you have such a generalized outlook on one demographic of students, it really prevents you from really getting to know those students, because two-parent households exist in every community. There are families who are doing well off, and they're only in these neighborhoods because it's generational. That was a house that they inherited, so that's just the neighborhood that they're coming from. So just recognizing that these students are not a monolith when they're coming from one particular neighborhood. So that's one thing, just to keep drawing back to the importance of the parent work group, and how we can address biases, because I can tell you a lot of the reports I'm receiving are around cultural engagement, race and discrimination. And that's coming from student to student and teacher to student. So really, how do we leverage, all of our stakeholders? And I think parents will play a perfect role in really just helping give context to these students and, their particular needs. But yeah, so that's why I just want to show you that.
How well was this training received? We received a similar training, not training, but
So,
like a session at work. It was this collaborative session where people could ask about like microaggressions.
What we
examples.
did, I probably only had a 30-minute time to get up in front of the staff. So the first thing we did go through defining implicit bias and microaggressions, but we spent a significant amount of our time looking at interacting with implicit bias. So there's something called Project Implicit from Harvard University.
Yeah, I think I've done it before.
Yeah, so it's a series of implicit bias tests.
Yeah, yep, I've done those. Yep.
And this biggest thing is recognizing that, one, all people have biases. Biases are not just race and identity.
Right. Bias
is literally, is pervasive in anything that we do, whether it's gender and careers, whether it's religious preferences, income disparities. So I really encourage the individuals to take this exam. We left them with the QR code and some of the questions that we have, because what we did here is we looked at some real life data. So this is data from someone's actual results, and it showed that this individual had a 24% strong automatic preference for European American. Now this was the race implicit association test, but this is just the result. So what that does is it's a conversation starter, because a lot of individuals are not aware of these biases until you put it in front. Right. Now, like any study and any research, is it foolproof? Absolutely not. Right. So there's some dissenting opinions about Well, and what I like about the
the concept of implicit bias is like it shows that it's not always what's the word, an intentional thing. Right? It shows that, like, you know, you're not like a bad person if one has bias. Everyone has bias, but how do you mitigate it? How do you be aware of it? And so you can address it in practice that way.
And what we're seeing now is recognizing that one, like you said, one bias action does not automatically make me prejudiced or doesn't make me
it's not like you're accused.
Racist.
Right.
However, what implicit bias is the same, though you may explicitly have a fundamental belief in equality, in equity.
Right.
In situations where your back may be pushed against the wall, where you have a student who just gets out of control, and you feel like you don't have any control, we default back to behaviors. So granted, it's well-meaning and well-intentioned, but when the individual and the teacher feels like they've exhausted all their resources and they don't have anything left, you typically result into kicking the student out of class, or saying something you don't mean, or misspeaking.
Or even just being like, well, this this concept, you wouldn't understand this concept because it's X or whatever.
And that it came up in our conversation, and some of the feedback that I was able to give them is leading in truth and transparency, and not being afraid to apologize, because what that does is immediately it sucks the air out of the issue, because in that moment you're recognizing you've done wrong, and you apologize in the same manner in which disrespect was given. So if I stood in front of my student and I called him out for behavior and I was wrong, in that same manner I'm gonna acknowledge that student. Now granted, I have some administrators, some teachers, I would never apologize to a student. I'm the authority and all those things. Yes, I recognize, but in the spirit of increasing the value of each academic meeting a minute, I don't have time to argue back and forth. If I know I messed up, I'm going to apologize so we can get right back into engaging that student in learning. So that's just some of the conversations that we were having around that.
And I guess I've run this to the ground because it's one of my favorite sayings forever, but everything you do, intentional or not, is a deposit or withdrawal. And that includes your nonverbal. And so, back to what you said, sometimes the best way to disarm somebody is surprise them and say, I'm sorry. Because they got all these notes.
They're ready to argue.
You know, parent comes to see you, they got all these notes, they're going to let you have it. Then you say, oh, I'm sorry, we need to redo this. We could have done a better job. And they go, yeah.
And I told them, a sorry is not all. Sometimes a sorry is
same thing with us.
You saying it.
Right.
But then sometimes a sorry is change behavior. You know, so recognizing what situation calls for it, because you can only say I'm sorry once with words before there's a genuine need for change of behavior. So recognizing that there was many different feelings you could have based on the results, but this is what I left them with. Sitting in your reaction, reflect on your life experience that may influence your results. So it's not making any assumptions about who you are. What in your life influenced these results? And that's where we start to change, and that's through acknowledgement. So I can go, like I said, implicit bias and microaggressions are trainings that each individual can take 2 hours. So I would not do that to you guys tonight. The next thing that we did do, I had the opportunity to go to College Park for their town hall. They had a story of my culture town hall, and I was able to go down there with the New Hanover County Diversity and Inclusion Department, a representative from there, and also our very own Tanya Jordan. She's over elementary school counseling, if I'm not mistaken, crisis management. So she was there as well. So that was just a phenomenal opportunity. And the last thing that is not on here is recognizing it's November. We're celebrating Thanksgiving. And this is where we find ourselves with different schools pushing out content that may or may not be offensive. So recognizing that and partnering with the curriculum instruction department, if I'm not mistaken, partnering with curriculum instruction, and that we did run it past communications. I did send out leadership update to principals. And I just want to read that. That would be the
Okay,
last thing.
yeah.
I just want to read what that update was, and it went out for all principals to see. And it reads as following. Principals, as the holiday season approaches and schools begin to recognize Thanksgiving, please be mindful that this holiday isn't celebrated by everyone. Navigating that nuance can be difficult for some educators as they prepare to launch class projects, homework, and artistic displays. The term Indian, when used to identify indigenous people in North, South, and Central America, may be deemed outdated and offensive. Words like uncivilized, civilized, savage, and prehistoric are offensive when discussing human history and can invalidate oral history traditions in indigenous communities. The term Native is often used to describe indigenous peoples from the United States, Native Americans, Native Hawaiians, Alaska Natives. It can also serve as a specific descriptor, Native people, Native lands, Native traditions. And these are some things that I wanted just for them to push out for students or teachers to consider. Are students only referring to Native Americans in the past tense? Discuss Native American. It's important for teachers to discuss Native Americans as contemporary people involved in current affairs and practicing living traditions. We have already received feedback regarding this matter. And it's important for your teachers to review all curriculum materials to ensure their appropriate use of language before distributing them to the students. So that's just recognizing, we do want to celebrate, but we want to do it in a manner in which all people can engage and just being just super mindful because it's easy to pull a fun activity and not realize that it may be insensitive. So I just, I want to make sure we just being as proactive as possible with making sure we get that message out. With that being said, that is the Equity, Diversity, Inclusion Board meeting, and I thank you all of you guys for showing up. Thank you guys, and I appreciate it.
Yep.
All right.
Good.
Any final words?
Any interesting discussion at the town hall?
Oh no! So the town hall was an opportunity for. I was only able to get there for the 3rd and 5th graders.
Okay.
For them to, share about their culture, and they shared some of the cultures in their classroom with like their calming corner and handling little issues amongst peers.
Yeah.
They did a little performance. I'm going to look up this name really quick. I want to say her name and I want to get it right. Mm-hmm. Give me a second. I was there with, if I'm not mistaken, I hope I'm saying the right person. I was there with Mrs. Marimer McKenzie, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
She came and she shared her story of her culture, and she just spoke about her background, just her cultural background. And I followed up next to her because she was able to speak from the lens of cultural connection through her home country. And me being born and raised from Wilmington is often different, not having that cultural connection to a physical place outside the United States, to draw that culture. And it was such an awesome opportunity for me to get up behind her and demonstrate and show, because I'm a past social studies teacher, I taught world geography, so I did a phenomenal culture unit anyway, and talking about the 6 aspects of culture and how individuals only look at culture from a big, from like having just this connection to this, to a land. And I was able to talk about, how I was able to build my own culture, how you have the power and authority to build, to create your own culture and what that looks like. For my family, I gave the example was my parents never allowed me to make any plans before 2 p.m. on Sunday.
Okay.
Because that was the time to go to church. We always went to church that morning. And do we know? I don't know why, but even now to this practice, I don't have it. I don't make any plans. So things that just start that we don't know why we do it,
Yeah.
and we end up passing it down to our kids. You know, those things are traditional. You know, for our individual family dynamic,
Yep.
and it's important for students to be able to see that and make meaning of that, because not all students have that ancestral connection or have someone they can talk to
Right.
to get those details. So it was important for me to share that if you can't connect to a culture in the past, your actions right now are setting the tone for the culture of your future. You know, so the behaviors, the things, the traditions that you do now
Yeah,
that you
that's
think are trivial are going to be the things that are going to take place generations from now. So that was also
Yeah.
an opportunity.
Yeah,
This-
that's
This
great.
has changed a lot of that.
Exactly.
If you had this, you wouldn't worry about it. I'm telling you, this
Exactly. But again, the
Beautiful.
meeting has ended.
changed a lot.
Okay.
Yeah, this is, wow. I read an article the other day where the schools is pretty good.
All right. Perfect. He's ended it for us.
Is it
Yeah. we're
off?
good.
Okay,
Yeah.
sweet.
I read the
that's
other
great.
day where a school, high school,